Tuesday, January 26th. First thing on the agenda is, do we have any bill requests? Okay, go ahead. Either one. Let's allow Natalie first, ladies first. Okay.
Here we go. Hi. Natalie Bright, I'm here to request a bill on behalf of the Kansas Society for Human Resource Management and our fellow business partners who have been working on the unemployment insurance reform. We have a bill. The RS number is 0713, and this will look to modernize the current system and look to make adjustments to the formula to replenish the trust fund.
Okay. Any questions? Without objection, it's introduced. Any objections? Not seeing it, it's introduced. Okay, just make sure you get with Michael. Are there any objections? It's introduced. Thank you. Any, Senator Dahl?
I have a bill to introduce. It's RS 0294. It deals with medical marijuana.
Okay, are there any objections? It is introduced. Thank you. Are there any further bill introductions? And you're not going to make sample cookies or anything, are you? That's just a joke for anybody listening. Do we have anybody? Let's see. We'll go ahead and move on to our presentation of the unemployment insurance from the employer's perspective. Let's start off today with Eric Stafford, Kansas Chamber. Eric, you're on video. So
hey, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can't see you, but we can hear you. We could see
Okay.
you a minute ago. Oh, it's loading? Okay, now we can see you.
All right. Well,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry that you can see me now. It's not always pleasant. Good morning, committee members. My name is Eric Stafford, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Kansas Chamber. Today, submitting joint testimony on behalf of the Kansas Chamber as well as NFIB Kansas and Dan Murray with just kind of a general overview. We'll get more into specifics with future speakers this morning, but we wanted to provide just general background on the unemployment insurance system and reforms that have taken place in recent years, really dating back to the great recession of 2008, 2009. Overall, the unemployment insurance system is a system designed to supplement the loss of income when an individual loses their job by no fault of their own. If they quit or are fired for cause, generally they're not eligible for benefits. The UI system, the Department of Labor receives funding from the U.S. Department of Labor to essentially help their operations. But it's important, I think, for us to point out that UI benefits are 100% paid for through taxes on employers. So back in 2015, 2013, when we were working on some reforms, there were some folks are saying, I can't believe we can't access our benefits when we're paying into the system from the employee standpoint. And that is simply not true. These taxes are paid 100% by employers. Part of the problems that we've faced in the past, if you think of unemployment insurance like car insurance, and if I have a clean driving record, I should theoretically have lower premiums than Dan Murray, who has 16 car accidents and 4 DUIs. He's probably going to have very high premiums or be very uninsurable. However, the tax structure of employers hasn't always operated that way. And the changes that were made in 2015 largely focused on the structural side of taxation for employers to restore fairness. Part of that happened because our wage base hadn't been increased for many, many years. So that happened in 2013. Employers pay taxes on the first $14,000 of wages for each employee. They pay on a per employee basis. It used to be that taxable wage base of $14,000 used to be $8,000. And then in 2013, we increased it to 12 and then to 14 over a period of years. And so that helped kind of restore a little bit of balance into the system, but also in terms of the tax tables that were put into place. So want to go through the reforms of 2013. Those dealt with some structural changes on the tax side for employers. I mentioned the wage-based piece, but it also dealt with the what we call the integrity of the system. Who is eligible for benefits? So I mentioned earlier, if an employee loses their job by no fault of their own, entitled to benefits. If they're fired for cause, typically not. We had circumstances where employees were being fired for cause, but they were still receiving benefits back in 08, 09, 10. So we were trying to really focus in 2013 on shoring up the integrity of the system. Severance pay and holiday pay. So first, I'll start with severance pay. Those were two pieces of reforms in 2013. That the severance pay piece, we had individuals when they lose their job and they get a severance package from their employer, say for 2 months worth of benefits or salary. They were going to start their unemployment insurance right away and essentially, double dipping, getting the UI benefit as well as the salary. We worked with the legislature to modify language a little bit that dealt with the severance pay piece to say that you can get unemployment insurance benefits after the severance expires. So to ensure that you're not collecting both your income and the UI benefit. You haven't lost any income if you're getting severance pay, whether it's a lump sum payment or paid out over time. And so that was the first piece there. Holiday pay was the one that kind of surprised everybody. It surprised us when we heard about it from our membership. And these were all changes that we heard about from our people, that SHRM and NFIB heard about their people from their members as what are some deficiencies in the system. So this was all, again, member-driven input from the people that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. The holiday pay piece dealt with this. We heard about it from manufacturing that, they're working 12-hour days. They work 3 days, have 2 days off, or 2 days, have 3 days off. Their hours fluctuating between 35 and 45 or 48 hours a week. And some employees figured out that if they were closed during the holidays, but the employer still paid the employees for 40 hours worth of work, they only worked 20 because of the way the shifts work. Employees could go collect unemployment insurance benefits for the fact that they only worked 20 hours. They didn't work 40 or 45. So they were getting partial payment of unemployment insurance benefits. That is not the system. The employers need 40 hours to be home with your family during the holidays. You shouldn't be able to be eligible for unemployment insurance, but holiday pay was not considered under the Kansas definition of wages as qualifying wages. So it allowed, kind of created a loophole. Again, 2013 phased in the taxable wage base. We lowered the high cost multiple, which is in the part of the formula as to how much the trust fund should have. We were having issues back in the Great Recession, 2008, 9, 10, 11, where Department of Labor was sending notices to employers. I think Natalie coined the phrase and was using it frequently, of the December surprise, where for the upcoming tax year, employers were getting their notice in mid to late December saying, hey, by the way, your taxes are going up significantly. And so we put it in statute that, or asked for it to be put in statute that the notice be sent by Department of Labor by November 30th. Also, we noticed that our new employer rate, the contribution rate for new employers that used to be 4%, that was, again, in our view, an impediment to a new business that has to pay in for the first few years at a higher rate. We wanted to get that down to a lower rate, and that was lowered to 2.7%. The last piece that was included in the 2013 reforms dealt with the duration of benefits, where we used to have static 26 weeks no matter what the state unemployment insurance rate was. So anybody was eligible for 26 weeks of benefits. we could be at 3.5% employment, and they could still be eligible for that full duration. In 2013, an amendment was brought on the Senate floor that would modify that to reflect the health of the state's economy, where benefits fluctuate. When the state unemployment rate goes over 6%, as it did at the early stage of the pandemic, individuals are eligible for 26 weeks of
Hey, Eric.
benefits. Yes.
We're having some network problems here. Did you call from a landline?
No, I'm on my computer.
What if we called you?
Get your cell phone.
So I'm having issues with my phone, and I did a total restore of my phone, and I'm about halfway through it today. That was terrible timing. So I don't have a cell phone right now. I can get my wife's cell phone if that would help. Would you prefer that?
Probably help.
Okay. Is there just some feedback issue, or
You're cutting in and out.
am I?
Yeah.
Man. Okay.
We're having network issues with the building.
We can try it again.
Hey, you know what? It just launched. You want me to use my phone? I can call in that way, or whatever, however you
Yeah,
want
that way we can at least hear you.
it. Okay.
Is he calling?
Do I call you or you call me?
Someone call him. Dan,
Okay.
come on.
Hey there. Yeah.
Okay, now try it.
Is that better?
We can hear you.
Okay.
You might want to turn off your computer's audio.
Yeah. How's that?
That looks
Okay.
good.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. I'm sorry about that.
Go ahead.
So as I was saying, the benefit duration that fluctuates with the health of the state's economy, to where when the unemployment rate is below 4.5%, individuals are entitled to 16 weeks of benefits, and from 4.5% to 6%, they're entitled to 20 weeks of benefits, and over 6%, 26 weeks of benefits. So the longer the benefits last are designed to be in bad economic situations. So 2013 was more the integrity side. 2015 was really more of the tax structure. How are we going to tax employers? And that is when we switched from what's called an arrayed system versus a fixed system. The tax rates per group are put into statute, and the contribution rates are static. They're fixed. Before, under the rate system, we had 54 rate tables. We're now down to 27, so we compress those rate tables. And you could be in a rate group 10, which is a good place to be. It's towards the top. So you should theoretically have a lower rate. You could be in rate group 10 and have a contribution rate of, say, 1.4%, but then theoretically move up to rate group 8 because you're not laying people off and using the system, but have a higher contribution rate the following year, just all based on factors of what the trust fund balance is. So again, I mentioned we cut the rate groups down from 54 to 27. We put in statute. We learned during the Great Recession, leading up to the Great Recession in 2005, 6, 7, there was a moratorium on UI taxes put into place because we had $800 million in the trust fund, and we thought, you know what, we don't need any more money in there. That money's better spent in the state economy. And so UI tax rates were frozen for some positive balance employers. In hindsight, once the 2008 recession hit, we went through that $800 million in about 6 months, and the system went under. So we learned from that the moratoriums are bad. So it's best if we go ahead and put in statute the tax cuts and tax increases based on the trust fund balance
And it's all dependent upon the health of the UI system, how much money we have in there, whether employers will get reductions or whether they'll see surcharges based on the trust fund balance. So our whole purpose and design of the plan was to live 95% of our life in that neutral table, and never would we have imagined that we would get to the point where we were already in a cut situation leading up to the current situation we're in right now. Last year we had some legislators asking us, hey, we need to cut taxes. We've got $1.2 billion in the trust fund. You know, in late January, early February, we're having these discussions, and ultimately we decided that we said, no, we don't know when the next thing's going to hit. And little did we know, 6 weeks later, we would be facing COVID-19. Another change there is changing the maximum benefit amount to 55% of the state average weekly wage instead of 60%. This was changed again. Kansas has historically had rich UI benefits. We've been on the higher side of the nation, which as the employer community, we're okay with, except that they've gotten too disproportional. And the reason we're okay with having a little bit higher side of benefits is our system's also harder to qualify for compared to some states. So we pay people higher than what our neighboring states and regional states have done, but we also have higher barriers of entry based on the amount of money that has to be earned in order to qualify for benefits. So that's kind of the historical standpoint of where we've been. Top concerns that folks will get into in the next year or over the past year, and what brings our bill forward this year that Natalie just introduced is really that not all industries have been hit equally. So there's some uncertainty in some industries. There's some kind of status quo. They've just modified how they perform in the last 12 months. But everybody's been impacted from the federal additional benefits for unemployment insurance under the CARES Act. That $600 additional weekly benefit, it wasn't means tested. It wasn't up to $600. It was just flat $600. It's been tough getting people back to work in all industries under that program. So that's feedback that we've heard. And then number two, the level of fraud taking place in the state. There hasn't been a number that's been able to be put on the level of fraud in the state. We know what's happening. I was texting with somebody this morning over the fact that they're seeing 10 to 1 more fraud cases in Kansas than what they're seeing in other states. And I think that our future speakers are going to get into the numbers that we're currently seeing in terms of the number of claims being filed in Kansas over the last 2 weeks. Hopefully most of those are being stopped, but we're pretty sure and we're very confident that there is a lot of fraud continuing to happen here in the state. We have to try to pin down how much has actually been paid out, because in our view, that shouldn't be the responsibility of the employer community to pay back. And we're concerned that that's a very significant amount of money. So where do we go from here? We had $1.2 billion in our trust fund January of last year. We're now about $300 million projections from our folks that we're working with. They're going to present today. We could be out of money in the next 6 weeks. And, you know, I know our department had some differing viewpoints on that. They think we were going to be okay till summer. The positive news is with the unemployment insurance structure, most money will be paid in the first quarter into the fund, but that's probably only going to be $250, $300 million, I think. So again, we're going to be in a borrowing state here probably by midsummer at worst or at best. So they'll get into some details of what we're looking to bring. I would encourage all lawmakers that the governor put in her budget $37.5 million. I think it's from CARES dollars to spend on IT modernization for Department of Labor. However you can, please find a way to fund that. That is essential for the Department of Labor. I think the current secretary, interim acting secretary, Brett Flashbarth, we've worked closely with him for many years, fully trust his ability to get this system up and going. They're hamstrung, though, because of their computer system. That is a reality. It doesn't excuse the fact that fraud is still going on, but that's a big hang up. We acknowledge that from the employer community, and we would urge you to support funding to ensure that IT modernization gets up to speed. So all that said, because of technical difficulties and everything else, I've taken way too much time. So happy to answer questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for accommodating me to testify virtually today.
We're going to go ahead and ask questions of you now in case we lose you. So do we have questions for Eric? Senator Stephan.
Thank you, Chairman. It just came out the other day that the unemployment rate had really dropped in the state of Kansas. Does that not have any opportunity to stem the tide in the unemployment insurance drain?
Theoretically, yes, but I think as you look at the data, and they'll talk about this here shortly, we had 66,000 this week, and I think 69,000 last week claims filed in the state of Kansas. And there's a chart that is available. We have more UI claims than New York and Texas. We only have 2.9 million people living here. That number does not jive. So I think initial claims, Phil had put some data together, initial claims. So Phil will get into more of those specifics. But even though the unemployment rate's low, again, getting people back to work is important. I mean, we were less than 4% unemployment prior to the pandemic. It's better. It's not 12% like it was briefly, but there's, I think, still too much money being paid out for the unemployment rate that we have.
We're going to be hearing from the Labor Department on Thursday. We're kind of a week behind. This was all supposed to happen last week, but we got shut down. Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony, Eric. Last week, we heard from the Department of Commerce that they created 9,481 new jobs in the state for 2020. How does that add up? How many? I'd like to see a comparison of they're saying created, how many we lost, and how much on unemployment. And that may be for research instead of you, Eric. But I'd love to see that because to me, the numbers aren't adding up. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Thanks, Eric. We'll go ahead and move on. Dan Murray. Was yours joint with his? You don't want to talk about the DUI? No. Okay, we'll move on to Jeff Oswald. Unemployment Insurance Services.
Morning, Chairman Olson and honorable members of the committee. My name is Jeff Oswald, and I am the president of Unemployment Insurance Services. What we do is we are a third-party administrator that handles the unemployment claims and tax management programs for employers. So as a company that has represented Kansas employers since 1977, I have a very good working relationship with the Kansas Department of Labor. We've worked with them on many different projects over the years. I have a great amount of respect for Acting Secretary Brett Flaxbarth. In full disclosure, before I testified today, I did call him. I did not feel like I wanted to ambush him and tell him that I was going to testify here. So in full disclosure, they're aware that I'm going to be here and sharing some statistics that I have pulled up from our clientele. We represent employers in all 53 jurisdictions, and that is the 50 states plus Washington, D.C., the Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. They all have their own unemployment system. So we have a unique perspective on what's happening across the United States in comparison to what is happening here in the state of Kansas. I want to make it very clear that the issue here is not so much that fraud is not occurring in every state. It is occurring in every state. What is setting Kansas apart is the incredible volume of fraudulent activity that is occurring. Since October 1st of 2020, we have identified internally for all of our states more than 17,000 fraudulent unemployment claims. That's the entire nation. The Kansas portion of this total since October 1st, when the fraud really started ramping up, is 97%, equaling more than 16,000 600 unemployment claims for our Kansas employers. Since January 1st of 2021 alone, we've already identified more than 4,100 potentially fraudulent unemployment claims against our Kansas clients. These do not, by the way, include claims that on individuals that we've received now a second, a third, and a fourth notice on them. I've got an example here from Washburn University. We have an individual who it's been a fraudulent claim. Just since January 1st, we've received 3 notices on the same person. We keep reporting it as fraud, but they keep showing back up. Obviously, I think we would all agree that that should not be the case. I also want to make a point, and I hope the Kansas Department of Labor would agree with this, that if they've shown up on what's called the SIDES portal, the SIDES portal is a portal in which the employers of the state go in and they respond to their unemployment claims. It's an online service. If they've shown up on that means that that claim has been passed through the normal vetting process and has been put out there for an adjudication. Thumbs up or thumbs down on whether or not that person should get unemployment or not. So somewhere along the lines, people who have, if they've had a claim filed in their name, they're being passed through so that we are now responding to these claims just as if it was a normal unemployment claim. All right, so I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. So when I was in preparation for my testimony, I thought I wanted to be as fair and factually accurate as I possibly could. So the first thing I did was I just went out to the most recent week from the United States Department of Labor and looked at the claim activity for each state. And what I found even shocked me, to be honest with you, because of the 960,668 claims filed for the week ending January 16th of 2021, the state of Kansas had 66,323 claims. That ranked 3rd in the nation, only behind California at just under 124,000, Illinois at just shy of 110,000, and then we beat New York and Texas. And then I decided, well, I wanted to make sure that, there's surrounding Midwestern states were not also experiencing the same thing, which I knew internally they were not because I have clients in all the Midwestern states. I decided to go out and compare the claim totals for those. And as you can see here on the chart, the highest one is Colorado, which in fairness is dealing with somewhat of their own fraud issue. We are receiving a higher number of fraud issues in Colorado than, say, other states. But the comparison is not even close. The highest total is 13,700. Missouri came in at 11,400. And of course, the rest of them with a low of Nebraska at 2,784. So nationally, I would have to argue that this is a Kansas phenomenon, okay? California is having a major issue too, and I think that is adding to their total as well. Illinois is also another state that I would identify as having an issue. So I think the top 3 states are probably clearly having fraudulent claim issues. So I wanted to take it a little bit further, and I decided to take a common clientele that I have in both the state of Kansas and the state of Missouri, and that we happen to represent about an equal number of school districts in both states. So I took from October 1st, I decided to compare those, and in Kansas, we've identified and protested more than 7,200 fraudulent unemployment claims against our Kansas school district clients. In the state of Missouri, we've had 65. So it's, again, it's sticking out like a sore thumb. The micro level, I took 2 clients. They're very large clients. They have a presence on both sides of the state line in the Kansas City metro area. One is a large hospital network. The other one is a large professional services provider. The professional services provider in Kansas had 286 fraudulent claims. In Missouri, they've had 3. This is in the same time frame, by the way, as the Kansas school district example. The large hospital network has had 246 Kansas fraudulent claims, and the Missouri operation has had 3. The important thing to remember about this is that the Missouri contingency of their employees is 3 times as large as the Kansas contingency. So, in my mind, having established that there is a clear fraudulent claim problem in Kansas, I wanted to just take a little bit of time to discuss what is happening as far as how this impacts my clientele. I think it's first, I've already alluded to what happens when you get an unemployment claim and you have to respond to it, and it's called the SIDES program. We have received so many unemployment claims at one time that we've resorted to printing out the entire dashboard of the SIDES program platform, saving it in a PDF, and we email it to our clientele. It looks similar like this. We tell them, simply write on every name that's fraud. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see, fraud, 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 fraud. This goes on for 150 claims, and this is January 11th. Okay? This is one client. I represent close to 300 clients. So you can see how easily it gets to get to 7,200 in a hurry. Okay? Each time that one of our clients gets an unemployment claim and they have to go, the conversation is always the same. Well, that can't be. Jeff is sitting right next to me. He's working today. They go to Jeff and they say, Jeff, did you file an unemployment claim? Well, no. Well, somebody has. And that launches them into a 10 to 15 minute per person conversation to discuss how could this possibly happen. The first question they're always asked, almost universally, is how could you get hacked? So they have to spend time assuring them that they have not been hacked internally, that their information is safe, depending on how OCD the person is about their particular identity, which most people understandably are. Then they have to explain to them all the steps and all the ramifications of what they need to do, starting with, obviously, reporting this at the Kansas portal. So there's an incredible, when some of our larger school districts, Topeka Public Schools, Shawnee Mission Schools, Blue Valley Schools, et cetera, when you are receiving 200 to 300 of these a week, you are spending a great deal of time trying to manage something that you don't really have the resources to manage. And it doesn't really matter the size. Washburn University, which happens to be this particular client that I'm using here, they get 6 unemployment claims a year. They had 50 during the entire pandemic. And now they're up to 700 plus in just since October. So the time expenditure has become incredibly prohibitive for our clients. And it gets even worse when they have to go back to them, like I was mentioning the example I just did on the Washburn example since January 11th, there's 3 claims for this person, all right? And the person then says, well, what were you doing? You were supposed to report this. This was supposed to be taken care of. Now you are dealing with another whole set of emotions and another 15, 20-minute conversation. We've had some very angry people call us. Even though we don't have really a whole lot to do with it, they want to know why in the world what we're doing about it. We don't have much impact on this other than all we can do is report it. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap this up because I'm sure there's going to be some questions here. The general consensus of all my clients in Kansas is that something needs to be done about this. And I know I've talked to Secretary Flaxbarth. I've listened to the presentations. I know that there's something coming down the road. But there's an incredible amount of frustration and anger in the business community about this. None of our clients, nor do anybody here at my company blame the Kansas Department of Labor for creating this situation. We understand that this is a situation that has been years in the making, decades in the making, in fact, due to the computer system. However, they are the ones who control what happens with this epidemic, if you will. Okay, it's an epidemic within the pandemic. It's not only is the volume, but it's the frequency of people reappearing. They feel like when they report it, the information goes into a black hole. It's not being used. That's the only reason, and it's not just one person that's appearing multiple times. We've stopped tracking it. It's so frequent because we can't. If we tried to track all of this, we would never get anything else done, and I have clients in 49 other states. So the significance of this information being sent to them is, what are you doing with it? And finally, the feeling is only magnified when they have to reach out to people who have been deceased, both recently and long past. And they have to tell their families that somebody has filed a fraudulent unemployment claim in their deceased family member's name. And when I was talking to one particular individual at Emporia Schools, the person had just passed away in November. And we got an unemployment claim for them in January. And she was tell this family that somebody has filed an unemployment claim in their dead mother's name. And her quote verbatim to me is, "Enough is enough." And I think that is a good summary of my clientele's feelings about this situation. I appreciate your time. Thank you on behalf of my clients. And I will now take any questions that you might have.
Okay, we'll go ahead and do questions. Anybody have any? Senator Tyson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. I would ask, of those fraudulent claims, do you have an idea of how many have been paid out or receiving money?
We are just now starting to get a full picture of that. The third quarter charge statements, there were some isolated instances of individuals being paid. On the quarter, let me back up. The reimbursable employers receive charge statements on a quarterly basis, okay? Merit-rated employers receive it on an annual basis in the late summer, and then the governmental-rated employers, which is most of your cities, school districts, et cetera, they receive it in early spring. So the first indication we're going to have was the third quarter, and there were some isolated instances of that, not anything I would cause alarming, it happens, right? The fourth quarter benefit charge statements just came out, and I have a meeting with the Kansas Department of Labor tomorrow afternoon. We're going to be discussing this issue, but the early auditing of those charge statements is not looking very good. In fact, I just received an email from one of my clients that their charge statement of the 30 individuals who are on the statement, 2 she's never heard of, and 26 of them were reported as fraud.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to be clear and make sure everybody understands this. It's been a fraudulent claim. The person has contacted KDOL and said that it's a fraudulent claim, and we're still having payout as a result of this.
Without seeing I have not actually had an opportunity to see the charge statements, but based on the communication I've had with my clients, yes, that is the case.
You might be able to ask follow-up on Thursday of Labor Department.
We absolutely need to. Thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Senator Peck?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A comment and then a question on the information that was provided to us. I find it interesting. Kansas is got 66,300 plus. Our neighboring states, Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, Iowa, Nebraska, and Arkansas, all combined are 44,750, 22,000 difference, which is amazing. But my question would be, if you mentioned it, I'm sorry I missed it. I was doing some of the reading on your testimony. Do we have any idea or knowledge why Kansas is so much higher? Do we have some type of a gap in our system? Is it just because we have an old system? Is it I can't figure out why Kansas is so significantly higher compared to other states.
It is my understanding in talking to the KDOL and listening to presentations that the technology issue has been a significant problem. Missouri, for example, just using the most common, the most obvious example, has gone through a recent technological upgrade. So I'm sure that they have some better technology to help with identity verification. That being said, I also know that, and I can't speak to the internal workings of the KDOL, I did reach out to the Missouri Department of Employment Security, and I asked them, what do they do? And if an individual cannot be, their identity cannot be verified through the normal process, the normal protocols online, then what they must do is they must go into one of their career centers and actually show physical proof that they are who they say they are. So I think there's some stopgaps in other states that I'm not sure that I'm aware of anyway that occur in Kansas. I don't know that. That's something that I think the KDOL would have to answer though. But my suspicion would be is technology is the first issue.
I guess technology is certainly one of my weak areas, but this just, I cannot believe that we are where we are in our state. If other states aren't having the issue, that says something's wrong with us. Now, there may be other states who are having the issue, but not necessarily our neighbors and not the majority of states.
I think one of the things where we're at, we're trying to, technology is definitely one of the problems. We're trying to learn here what our problems are. Plan is try to address them this year, come up with a solution, probably upgrade the technology.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman, but it almost appears as though word has gotten out to the fraudsters, hey, Kansas is weak, go there.
No doubt about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The people who are making these fraudulent claims, are they Kansans?
Well, they're being filed in Kansas.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Are they Kansans?
I would not, I don't know. From what I know of the reporting of the issue is that a lot of it is overseas activity. So, yes.
So where are the checks being sent to?
Well, I've heard different versions of the scheme, but the most common version is what I understand is that the check is electronically submitted to a United States bank, and then there's an immediate transfer of the money to an overseas account. So.
Thank you, Senator Dahl. Senator Schwab.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It almost seems like a simple fix, and I appreciate technology, but we used to have unemployment offices, and you had to appear in person. Why don't we have something, a check in place that we could require people to even show up at their county courthouse and electronically file it there in person?
That's probably something we'll want to ask the Labor Department, see if we can't look at maybe going back to that. Any other questions, or you want to answer that?
Again, I don't know all the ramifications and the issues that are going to go on and something like that. I do know other states who have been confronted with this issue in the past. That was the nuclear option. Oklahoma went through this a couple of years ago where their own internal government databases were hacked and fraudulent unemployment claims were being filed on everybody, including the governor of the state. And they basically just shut the whole thing down and went back to a paper form until they could provide the same, they went old school. Now, obviously, there's a lot of issues that would go into that. So I'm not here to tell you that that's the answer, but, that's for you guys to decide.
Yeah, I'd have to think if we went old school, which it would solve the problem, probably get ripped up on social media. This day and age, I mean, there's got to be a way we can resolve that, and I think you'll see as we move forward, the legislation will be there to resolve it. definitely don't like it either. I haven't had it happen to me, but Michael had it happen at the start of session. Many people have had it done this year. It's not right, you know, and it's, I think Senator Dahl makes a perfect point. It's offshore, people doing it. And, you know, this is the thing about online services that, you know, I'm old school. I check for everything, that kind of method. And, you know, there's just people out there, and, you know, this is tens of billions of dollars across the country. This is not little money that they're taking out of our economy. But are there further questions? Go ahead, Senator Tyson.
I don't want to belabor it, but you said that it would take too much effort to track it. There are tools out there that would help with that, and it would help us track where and expose where the vulnerabilities are.
Well, let me, are you talking about my internal company or the Kansas Department of Labor? Because I can tell you how many, I just did, you know, I know how much is being filed against my clients. You know, it's.
You said, you made a statement that it would take too much time to track it.
No, I'm talking, in the interest of time, we've stopped tracking multiple times the same individual has received an unemployment claim. Yeah, because.
But that is helpful in the sense that, because those multiple claims, the data is different on the claims.
Well, I understand that, but, and I completely
But
agree.
I know it's
Yeah,
not your job to
right.
investigate that. You've given us great information. I'm just trying to figure.
No, I understand what you're saying.
I want to figure out where the breaches were. And I think it's more than one breach.
What I can tell you is that what we have observed is that the subsequent claim will be with different dates of employment, and it will be with different reasons as to why they're no longer working for that company. There's also another problem I really didn't touch on, and this kind of touches on the reimbursable side more importantly, is that even when we do contest a claim, say Jeff Oswald legitimately quit ABC Manufacturing back in 2019, when we go in and we look at the claim information that the claimant has provided, it doesn't match reality. So even some claims that we're protesting that we know may or may not be legitimate, they're not based, their employment history is clearly fraudulent. And we're adding blurbs to those claims, basically saying, this claim looks very suspicious. Yes, the individual quit. However, the reported dates of employment by the claimant do not match at all. And they're almost always being backdated to separations at the beginning of the pandemic or during the middle of the pandemic.
I think we've made it too easy to do the process without putting the proper roadblocks. I do wonder where they're getting the information, though, is another challenge. Is there?
Well, actually,
Not do a good enough job protecting the information, or are they getting it on the black market?
USA Today ran a very good article about this issue. It is a nationwide issue. Like I said, Kansas is not unique. They interviewed a Nigerian individual. He's the only one who was willing to go on record. For the equivalent of $2.50 in cryptocurrency, he buys your file off the dark web. And whatever information he can't obtain using the dark web file, he has an Ancestry.com account. He will Google your name and find out your wife's maiden name, your mother's maiden name, et cetera. And then he fills in the blank. And one guy, he's not even one of the big rings that are doing this with bots and stuff like that. He has managed to collect $50,000 in fraudulent unemployment benefits. And I don't know what the Nigerian currency rate conversion is for American dollars, but I'm gonna guess he's doing pretty well. sitting at a computer stealing our money. So that's the biggest issue, is probably where it's coming from.
Sure, sure. Yeah, that's interesting. Further questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to Philip Hayes, our own group.
Good morning, committee members. Thank you for having me. Just a quick follow-up. We've all heard of drug mules. If you've seen Clint Eastwood's latest movie, there's money mules in this whole scandal. So there's individuals that are also perpetrated and moving money for this crime ring. And if you're really interested in a rabbit hole in reading, look up Scattered Canary, and it'll tell you just how deep and how wide this whole problem is throughout the U.S. So today, again, I'm Philip Hayes on behalf of the Arnold Group. I've been very involved in the unemployment reform space for, I would say, over a decade. I kind of got on the UI train in 2005 when I was just disenfranchised with the up and down roller coaster of how my rates would ebb and flow to both sides of the extreme. Really got engaged in kind of the reform efforts in 2008, got involved with Natalie Bright and her consulting organization at that time, and have been, I would say, kind of a lead voice for the employer community, and have widely become known as the de facto Kansas business UI expert across the state. I get countless phone calls, emails on a daily, weekly basis, and trying to provide guidance, recommendations on how employers can respond. But there's just a lot of disbelief and frustration across the employer community currently. I think it's also important to let you know that I've served on the Kansas Unemployment Insurance Review Board, or the Kansas Employment Security Review Board, since 2014. I've served as the chairman of that board for a number of years. And so I've not only experienced UI from an employer perspective, even from a claimant perspective, as I've had personal family and friends that have been claimants on the system and have frustrations. But then I also kind of am behind the curtain with KDOL and in the final appeal process before it would go to district court on any cases or claims that are that there's disagreement with. So obviously any UI system in any state is designed to help in economic downturns. Ours has, I would say, failed on a number of fronts throughout this pandemic. Largely, I would say the legaciness of our system, or the age of it, is probably compounding our problem across the board on a number of fronts. When you think about our UI system, the COBOL system, being stood up in the early 1970s, if anybody has gamers or kids or grandkids with gaming systems, the very first gaming console was the Magnavox Odyssey. It was released in 1972, and then the Atari was released in 1975. That's when our system was born. And it's a little ironic that there is an exhibit in the American History Museum currently of a COBOL system, which is what we use here in Kansas. So one of the big focal points that the bill introduction that Natalie introduced today, I'm going to kind of walk through the 11 high points that we're going to look at. Number one, creating a unemployment compensation modernization and improvement council. I feel like, having been in the UI space for a number of years, I felt like I'm going through the most prolonged divorce at the state level, and we've got mom and dad pointing the fingers at each other as far as who's at fault and why we don't have a modern system. And the tough thing is, I really can't change anything about the past. And so what this bill language is looking at is what can we do in the future so we have a better path forward as we move forward. So this council would be comprised of 11 members engaged from the stakeholders, from the employer community, bring in employees or claimants, as well as legislators, as well as the Kansas Department of Labor. There's 4 primary focal points that this council would have. Number one, review and recommend technological infrastructure used to file claims and pay benefits, as well as the experiences had by both parties. Recommend system features to maximize responsiveness for individuals and employers. Recommend methods for sharing data across systems related to UI compensation, and focus on efficiency. And then recommend clamored for some changes for a number of years. Number two, just the modernization itself. It's one thing to have a plan, and we've had a plan really since 2002 when Kansas solicited READ Act dollars, and then we were granted additional dollars, and the legislature funded tens of millions of dollars also for the department. And here we are 18, almost 19 years later now, and we don't have a system that I would say serves Kansas or Kansas employers in a capacity that we deserve across the state. So part of this legislation would look at an aggressive schedule with that oversight to ensure that we get to the finish line with a modern system that is going to respond to both customer bases that utilize this system. There's obviously got to be a huge integrity focus with that. We've been beaten on initial determination. Number four, Kansas Insurance Trust Fund computations and data reporting transparency. As deep as I've been in the weeds for the number of years that I've been involved in this space, I keep an eye on these metrics, these numbers, because it influences businesses' tax rates. And if ultimately we're funding this 100%, I think we should be able to see those variables on a pretty consistent basis. So we would just request that that data be readily available and reported, and it's a 20-year look back, so a nice summary would be beneficial. I know that the KDOL does summarize that data. They push out a memo annually. They have to report up to the U.S. Department of Labor. As the contributing members, I think employers should see that data without having to request it on an ongoing basis. Number five, realign the Kansas duration of benefits with Federal Reserve's definition of full-time or full employment threshold of 5%. Mr. Stafford had talked about the sliding threshold with the health of our state and the number of weeks of duration of benefits. We would just like to align this with the federal standard that the Federal Reserve indicates that a 5.0 or a 5.2 is considered full employment. So we would just like to level up our 4.5 threshold to that 5.0. Number six, provide additional relief to all reimbursing employers for claim charges between 3/15 of 2020 and 12/31 of 2021. And what this would do is part of the CARES Act, the feds offered a 50% relief mechanism for reimbursing employers. And visiting with my colleagues that are classified as reimbursing employers, the number of examples that Jeff has shared as well, and I just think that we owe it to reimbursing employers to provide them more relief when they're getting hammered. They have to pay as they go, and if they don't, they get penalized. So these are our school districts, these are our nonprofits, these are the service providers that are providing services that we're probably already short on in our communities, and we're just gonna put additional hurdles up. So we would just recommend providing additional relief because our system is so antiquated and the potential for the fraud level is through the roof, that there should be additional relief for them as well. Number seven, this was kind of the start of all this even before the pandemic. A senator last year had said, hey, we think our trust fund is pretty healthy. We're nearing $1 billion. Are there any additional credits that we can give to the business community? So I had went through a data request. I got some scrubbed information, an aggregate set from DOL, and ran some numbers. We were going to tweak the trigger mechanisms for the tax rates, and then the pandemic hit, and that got put on hold. But what's actually been nice over the last 10 months, 11 months now, we've been able to actually fine tune that and tweak that. We've reached out with KDOL and even prior to speaking in front of the Special Economic Recovery Committee throughout the fall, kind of the general consensus is there's probably some relief that we can give to the higher rated employers, the better actors in the state, those that utilize the system least. We're just looking for parity and consistency on how we apply that. So just to give you some ideas, if we don't do anything with these mechanisms, the best rated employers, the top 10 rate groups, which account for about 65% of all rated employers in the state of Kansas, will see an increase beginning January of 22, ranging from 180% to 800% increase. The 800% increase is for the rate group 1 employers, which has about 35% of all rated Kansas employers. So the bottom negative employers, if we don't do anything again, they're only going to see a 21 to a 28.5% increase. And so this is the parity mechanism that we want to realign and build that on a merit-rated system, which is how our natural earned rates are structured. So we just want to apply those same principles. In reviewing my notes, we actually brought this forward in 2013, and this was one of the components that kind of got washed away in some of those early reform mechanisms. So it wasn't necessarily an oversight. I would say it was more of a compromise with the Department of Labor, because we were transforming the tax collection system so much from that arrayed system to the fixed system. There's a lot of uncertainty from the department at that time that would our fixed system work, and so we ultimately ended up compromising. I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams would have estimated that Kansas employers would have been in the credit table probably within the next decade after that passed in 2015. What's interesting is we ended up in the credit table in 2019 and 2020, so far quicker, which is about on pace where myself and Mr. Oswald projected that we would be. And we have spent an incredible amount of time and effort in running numbers. We're confident in the solutions here, but we still have some work to do and the challenges as we move forward. So item number 8, big reform, is providing economic relief to employer chargeability and credits as it relates to claimant fraud determinations. Currently, as a fraud determination hits, employers have to wait until that money is recouped back from states. I have a nonprofit colleague, reimbursing employer out of Hutchinson, Kansas, talked to her last week. She has a claim from 2011 for $300 that her organization is waiting for the state to collect those $300 on that misdetermination. They're being penalized. They had to pay that, and it's still being applied 9 years later. And so to me, that's a disservice, again, for those employers that they pay as they go. They should only pay on legitimate claims. And I would say that that reasoning should go for all rated employers as well, is if there's a fraudulent determination that is made and benefits are paid out, the state should go after the collection piece of it, but the employer should not be held responsible for that decision when they supply the appropriate notification and documentation. Number 9, provide economic relief to the Kansas UI Trust Fund for all improper payments between 3/15 of 20 and the end of 2022. And these dates are significant because the 3/15 date is the start of the pandemic, and the 12/31/22 date is the date that we would recommend that a modernization effort be finalized for the UI system. We will have another economic downturn, and if we're not aggressive and own this, then we're going to have problems again in the future. So number 10, enhancing the work share program to prevent future layoffs. This is an excellent program. I think it's cumbersome. It's very archaic. It's in line with the rest of our platforms that employers have to utilize. There's got to be a way to reduce the administrative burden for employers, but then also create an educational campaign or the awareness and the support piece of it to preserve jobs. If we can do partial hours and partial pro rata unemployment benefits for an employer to weather that economic storm. And then last one, item 11, is a requirement for KDOL to acknowledge, process, and respond to all reported job refusals. within a timely manner. As the employer community, we have 10 days to respond. Otherwise, we miss our appeal window. Throughout this pandemic, I've reported more than 150 job refusals, and I've not got confirmation or word on any, and that's one of the frustrating components from my counterparts, is we report it and nothing happens. It falls into the black hole, as Jeff stated earlier. So we would just like the same determination that if we're required to respond, can we get some sort of indication that our voice is being heard, and that's those facts are going to be included in the determinations on those decisions. If we could share my screen. I have 9, actually 10. I elaborated on Jeff's material or his numbers for how Kansas stacks up with other states. But before I get into that, Kansas SHRM did a survey in December of 2020. We actually launched, we had such an influx of companies, employers saying, we're getting hammered with fraud. What guidance can you give? KDOL did a webinar, and they've done a handful of webinars. But I had a large law firm from the Wichita area contact me and said, hey, can you speak to this? You're the resident expert. So Jeff and I, we got in and did this. Within 5 days of this being pushed out on December 18th, we launched the webinar 2 days before Christmas on December 23rd. We had to cut our attendance off at 500 because that's the only capacity we had through our Zoom account. So again, and then there was a call to action at the end of this is, can you give us some sort of numbers, because we're not getting those aggregate numbers from the state. So we said, we're going to try a different path. And the big red number is the percentage of fraudulent claims that the clients or the businesses are aware of. And you can also see what their average claim numbers are in any given year. In 2019, what they actually were in 2020. And then the number of claims that they've received in 20, the number of fraudulent claims of that, and the percentages in the red. I would recommend that you read the comments in the far right column of this addendum. We solicited feedback if we could carry a message on to the governor as well as legislators for this upcoming session. So these comments are pointed directly toward you and asking for relief. But what's interesting out of these claims, the aggregate average is 73% fraudulent. So if we scroll down, this is the chart that elaborates on the data that Mr. Oswald had provided. Kansas provides or represents less than 1% of the U.S. population. And if you look at 0.91% of the population, but yet we're representing nearly 7% of the claims in the United States for week ending 1/16. Something's out of whack there. If you look at the far right column, California has roughly 0.7% of their total claims against their state employment or jobs that are on the record for December's jobs report or employment labor report. Kansas is at 4.59%. You look at our peer states down below, you look at California or Illinois. Illinois has got a problem. They have a surge of fraud going on. There's a number of news articles in Illinois and California and some of the larger states. There's no way Kansas has earned this position with natural claims that should be paid out. This is a stark telling sign that Kansas is actually just being overrun and attacked on a fraudulent capacity. The bottom portion, and as Senator Peck had indicated, our 6 peer states in the Midwest, 44,751 claims. They average 4.66% of all U.S. claims in that week. Kansas is over 6 of our other Midwest peers. The subsection below here, as KDOL had indicated last week, if we have 2,300 fraudulent claims that we know we're stopping on a daily basis, if we back out 2,300 times 7, that's 16,100. If we back that out, we're still at 50,223 claims, which is north of our peers. But for me, this is an apples to apples comparison. The data is extremely telling on this chart. Next, just trying to quantify what our fraud is, if you look at the chart we just left, Kansas to California, we're outpacing California on a 10-to-1 fold, nearly 11-fold. And if you look at their numbers, they paid out $114 billion in claims. They now, 3 weeks ago, they said $8 billion in fraud. Last week, they said $9 billion in fraud. As of yesterday, they're reporting $11.4 billion in fraud. That's 10% of their payments. They've got 17% of their claims sitting on the sideline of high suspicion for fraud that they think are going to add upwards of another $19 billion in fraud. So if we were to look at Kansas, this summary would be the November jobs report for Kansas, 1.1 million jobs. Kansas unemployment claims through 44 weeks of the pandemic is just a little over 1 million claims. That 73% of fraudulent claims would equate to 775,000 claims that would be potentially fraudulent. And I know this is very 10,000 foot, but if we wanted to look at some sort of numbers, if you look at the average, do what? We have 1.1 million jobs in the month of November in Kansas. We have 1,060,000 claims through 44 weeks of the pandemic since March 16th. So if we apply that 76% variable for potential fraudulent claims of the 1,060,000 claims, that leaves us with 775,000 claims. If you apply that for 1 week against the average benefit paid through the 44 weeks of the pandemic of $356, we're looking at nearly $277 million just on that equation. If we back out the 250,000 claims that KDOL had indicated last week, now we're down to 810,000 maybe potentially good claims. You apply our percentage for potential fraud, we're at 593,000. Again, we're north of 200 million in potential fraud. We're looking at improper payments. On average, USDOL will say most states hit about 10% improper payments on any given year. Kansas, since January 1 of 2017 through June 30 of 20, is at 14.21%. And again, all those metrics are different because every state has their own incubator and their own system. But what's interesting is Kansas is the number 10 state in improper payments across the U.S. for that time period, which I would liken to say that it has something to do with our antiquated system again. So just improper payments would be 147 million. If you look at total benefits paid out in 44 weeks, $988 million out of the trust fund that Kansas employers funded, that 14.21% improper payment is 140 million. So you can look at numbers, and I can make a case that if California is 11-fold over where Kansas is, I would venture to say our fraud could be north of $600 million as of today through 44 weeks.
We're worst in the country per population. We got about 10 minutes max. I mean, we got people who are going to try to be in here, so.
I just wanted to show here.
Why don't you hit your points and then we get some questions.
Okay. Our trust fund is scheduled to bankrupt February 27th. Back in September 17th, I had projected, Kansas SHRM projected that the trust fund would bankrupt March 5th. So we're off about a week. We are just where the trust fund is going to be. Best case scenario, by the end of the year, we'll be $1 billion in debt. Worst case scenario, $1.8 billion in debt. We will end up losing our food and credit reductions, and we're going to have a tax increase from the feds to help us dig out of this hole.
I just got this job.
I do want to say that there's 22 states have borrowed $48 billion from the feds to date. 44 weeks, $48 billion. And in the Great Recession, it took 3 years for 33 states to borrow $41 billion. So we're on an accelerated path, and Kansas is in line to borrow to a pretty large sum. We had asked for some CARES dollars, and those are all spent at this point, other than the $37.5 million that Governor Kelly has allocated for a UI modernization, those absolutely need to be used for modernization so we can put some identity theft provisions, a better service experience, and a modern system in place to carry us forward.
If you look at the speeches I give on the Senate floor the last couple days of session, this is exactly what I said was going to happen. It happened once before in my political time here, but this is much worse. We didn't have the fraudulent. The numbers are much bigger. The stuff we did in 2015 was great, putting the triggers in, doing that. But the fraudulent and the numbers are just at a whole nother level. We've got a lot of work.
What's difficult and most frustrating, I think, from the employer community is we were told repeatedly that we would not be charged for fraudulent cases or COVID-related cases, et cetera. And that has been dispelled at this point. And even though we said we were told that we wouldn't be charged for it, we're certainly going to pay for it. And if we get to that worst-case scenario, we're probably on an 8-year plan to pay this back, and the pain that's going to come with food or credit reductions. I just feel like we're operating with an old system that is penalizing employers as we move forward.
Well, we got to modernize this system, and we got to bring it up to date, and we got to get the fraud worked out. We need to put some checks and balances.
Beyond the modernization.
Senator
Chairman, I've got to go. Bottom line is we've heard the sirens going off this entire time period. And I don't get the idea that anything's being done across the way with the Department of Labor. I don't think we have much time to take some sort of action that's going to need to be pretty darn drastic, like the nuclear option. So I don't think sitting around and continuing to watch this fraud is any kind of solution.
We're going through a burn rate of $151 million a month in 4 weeks. Now, we've had $50 million collected over the last 4-week period of time, but you figure $300 million over the course of a 2-month period, that's the trajectory that we're on, and this hole is getting deep by the second.
Well, and I mean, we've been debating this all summer, really. We had a lot of meetings. You know, I wish we would have got the Labor Department, everybody over here last week. Been asking for a bill from day one, and we've got the bill introduced. So when it's done, it'll be read in. We're going to be, once we have a bill that we have a number, it'll be on the, you know, as quick as possible. It'll be teed up, and the focus of the committee will be on that bill until it's done. So, go ahead, Senator Tyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. I just want to know if it's coming in one bill or many bills, because he brought up a lot of topics, and thank you for your work and attention to this. It is a big issue.
You know, we'll do as many bills as needed. You know, we definitely, and we're going to hear from the Labor Department on Friday. You know that we've been fighting for a while with the department and the second floor to get this turned around. We'll say, you know, some of us didn't feel like the secretary, one of the secretaries was doing a lot. We've echoed our opinion. Took a lot of flack for echoing that opinion, but I think we were right. If we would have jumped on it, we would have had a much bigger balance, and that's when we needed to. You know, the fraud, I will say, no one can predict fraud when it's going to happen and at the level it is. This is really because of the system's dated. We don't have proper controls in place. If this was an internal business, we'd been auditing the system all along to make sure that these failures couldn't happen. And you know, it's just something the state doesn't do. Quick, any other questions? If not, okay. Thank you. Thanks for coming. We're work in progress on this. Thanks, guys.